Hi folks, and at the age of 1, I probably didn't watch a lot of films. I think it's probably safe to say that maybe something would have been on in the background that might have wormed its way into my psyche, but it's very unlikely that any of the films spoken about today were avidly watched by a 1-year-old me. However, many of the films from this year did formulate part of my love of films over my developing years a few years later, and we'll come to them in a bit as we talk about My Life in Film 1974. So 1974, like I've said, I was only 1 year old. It wouldn't be for a few more years, and we're going to get to that in 1977 when I started to really identify films. But, I mean, just looking at the top 10 films from the box office of 1974, this is the US box office, not the UK, because it's hard to track down all those figures. You've got films like Blazing Saddles, you've got Towering Inferno, you've got Airport, you've got The Godfather Part 2, Earthquake, Young Frankenstein, The Life and Times of Grizzly Adams, The Longest Yard. Pretty much every film from the top 10 of that year were ones that I watched relatively young and actually keep going back to, and they sparked up a certain interest. I mean, take for example the examples of Towering Inferno and Airport 1975. Bizarrely came out in 1974. Two kitsch factor disaster movies, and I have a love of disaster movies. I know that a lot of them are nonsense, a lot of them are very generic and formulaic, but there's something about the way in which they just throw a handful of well-established celebrities, either A-listers or B-listers or a combination of both, into these situations where things are just going out of control rapidly, and it's simple escapism, thrill and pleasure. Even modern examples such as, Skyscraper. Skyscraper is by no means a good film, but the structure of the film, the fun of it, and it knows what it is. And The Rock is a great, captivating presence on screen. He can star in the most ridiculous nonsense, but he's still an enjoyment to sit and watch. And disaster films have stuck with me from that day onwards. And Earthquake, Airport 1975, and Towering Inferno are definitely within my top 5. My top 1 is Poseidon Adventure. We'll get to talk about that someday. But they've always held a fascination for me. Now that it's all CGI fueled showcases, they're not quite as good as those early days when it was practical effects, but they're still, it's a great genre, and it was, the 70s was a great era for starting off the whole fascination with disaster movies. But the list of quality films in 1975 doesn't just stop within that top 10. There's some people would argue that there's a lot of films that didn't make the top 10 that year that were actually much better, such as Chinatown, the Jack Nicholson starring film, which had a release in the June of that year. Four Musketeers. I spoke on the last one briefly about my love of the Three Musketeers with Michael York, etc. And the Four Musketeers, which was filmed back to back with the Three Musketeers, was more of the same fun adventure, and one of my favourite films of all time. Robert Redford appeared in The Great Gatsby, which is one of the many adaptations of that classic novel, and it's one of the most recognised versions. Roger Moore was back once again as James Bond in The Man with the Golden Gun. Christopher Lee and Britt Eklund offered very able support within the film, although it's not a film that stands the test of time, and it is, the more that I watch it, the more I'm aware it's actually quite a weak Bond film, and I'll probably get a lot of people hating me for saying that. The second of the 3 Sinbad films came out that year, which saw Tom Baker, everyone's favourite doctor, stealing scenes as the evil Prince Cora. You've got to love the Sinbad films, you've got to love the stop motion creatures. The Ray Harryhausen designs were epic and legendary. Not his best work on the Sinbad films. I mean, his best work was clearly on Jason and the Argonauts, but the Sinbad films have a pleasure to them. And as a child, I used to love watching out for these coming up. It'd be a crazy, you knew that one would be on over the Christmas period, so you'd flick through the Radio Times when the 2-week special came out and circle what days and dates anything which Ray Harryhausen was involved in was going to be on, because they were going to be a joy to watch. The Carry On team churned out their 26th saucy romp, Carry On Dick, which isn't a bad film, but the franchise is starting to show a few creaks by this point. It was the last film that starred Sid James, Hattie Jacks and Barbara Windsor, and so it was the end of an era for the whole franchise. But, yeah, it was a fun romp. And Mel Brooks had a very good year with Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles, both mentioned in the top 10 of the year. Two films that stand the test of time, despite the fact that they could both be really frowned upon in this modern society when things are getting cancelled and like, oh no, that's shocking. But the thing is, I mean, things like Blazing Saddles' whole approach was a mocking way of looking at race politics within America in a Western setting. Absolute hilarity. It knows what it is. It knows when it's potentially causing offence, because the whole point is it's causing offence to make you realise what's offensive in society. And Young Frankenstein is a brilliant spoof of the Frankenstein story, given some excellent performances and definitely one of the finest of Mel Brooks' career. John Carpenter started his foray into the big screen this year, Dark Star. Now, if you've never experienced Dark Star, it's very early Carpenter. It's a sci-fi film that inspired films as diverse as Alien and TV shows as bizarre as Red Dwarf. Space slackers on board a ship, tackling problems that arise, including a beach ball kind of alien menace and a malfunctioning bomb that is hyper intelligent and starts to question its purpose in life. Brilliant film. A bit tough to grasp on first watching because it's very out there, and there was definitely something involved in writing the script. But it's a great film to keep going back to, and every time I go back to this, I get more and more out of it. Elsewhere in 1974, we saw films such as Emmanuelle, a softcore erotic tale that, you know, it was that era's 50 Shades, and the 70s saw a lot of these softcore industry starting to filter through. We had like the blaxploitation era continued with things like Foxy Brown, a film that went on to inspire Quentin Tarantino. We had the Herbie films, Herbie Rides Again, the second in the beloved adventures of the Volkswagen Beetle with a heart. There was also things like Gone in 60 Seconds, The Front Page, The Conversation, Island of the Top of the World, The Longest Yard, Madhouse, Death Wish, Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. Now, when I originally tackled this look at the year, way back in 2016, I did my usual picking out of some select films to rewatch. And those films were Zardoz, the Sean Connery Strange Future Society sci-fi adventure film that is best remembered for Connery wearing his orange trunks and thigh-length boots. Iconic image, and known to be quite a disaster of a film. I revisited it. You know what? It's not bad. It's not the stinker that people think it is, but it doesn't quite know what it is. I mean, this is coming from the same guy who gave us the excellent Excalibur a few years later, so obviously there was something in there, but it's all over the place. It's definitely a product of its times. A film that I chose that I never appreciated until I rewatched it as part of this was Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, I never got what, and we had this with the previous year with The Exorcist, that it was one of those films that was hyped so much about being the scariest films ever. Oh, it's gruesome, it's bloody. And the first time that I watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I wasn't enamoured because it wasn't what people were pitching to me. When I revisited it, I got it. It's not a gore fest that it was made out to be. It's not a slasher horror as it's made out to be. What it is quite a tension mounting journey into a horror situation. And I've rewatched it a few times since, and it is within my favourite horror films of all time, which does make my brother-in-law very pleased that I've turned my mind around on this. He loves it whenever I embrace a horror that he's loved and I could never understand. So a great example of a horror film, and it was a film that it did set a template, and it did start the ball rolling as we got closer to the 80s and the video nasties started to come out and everything was gore and slash, and we got things like Driller Killer. You know, Texas Chainsaw was the film that started it, even though there's not really a lot of gore in there. It's very cleverly done. Dark Star, which I've already mentioned. Thunderbolt and Lightfoot was a film that I'd never seen, and I got to watch it, and that was a joy to watch. Clint Eastwood and Jeff Bridges paired off nicely in the film, and obviously I rewatched The Four Musketeers, but then again I rewatch that pretty much every time it's on TV. So that's 1974 in a nutshell. I was 1 year old. I obviously didn't watch these when I was one, like I said at the beginning, but these are films that have influenced me over the year. What films from 1974 stand out for you? Pop them in the comments below. If I've not watched them, I'll add them onto my watch list and get them watched, and maybe talk about them in a follow-up at some point on this. In the meantime, remember, click, like, subscribe, share, all the business. Keep following the channel. I'll keep doing a mixture of different products. These film ones, looking at my years of my life, occasional talks about film stuff in general, and also, as you might have noticed, my foray into classic gaming, because two things define me as a person: films and video games. Geek throughout. Anyway, peace and love, guys. Hope you're all safe and well in this strange times that we live in. I'll catch you again next time when we talk about 1975.